Welcome to Higher Callings, a podcast featuring interviews of lawyers and other people who, through their careers and volunteer activities, have devoted significant time and energy to serving the common good. My name is Donald Frederico. I'm an experienced litigation attorney with a practice in Boston, Massachusetts. Through my work as a lawyer and my leadership positions in several nonprofit organizations, I've had the privilege over the years of meeting and working with many amazing people who have dedicated significant time and energy towards serving their communities and their professions and helping people in need. My hope is that by shining a light on some of these people and their good works, Higher Callings will inspire others to find their own paths towards making the world a better place. The trial of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd featured a team of prosecutors who exemplified professionalism at its best. My longtime friend, Phil Mueller, knows something about the professionalism of prosecutors. As a prosecutor for 26 years in Schenectady, New York, not only did he try 43 felony cases, including 25 murder trials, but he played an important role in training prosecutors across the state and literally wrote the book on the ethical principles that apply to criminal prosecutions. In this second part of my interview with Phil, we talk about some of his experiences in the Schenectady County District Attorney's Office, the role of the prosecutor as public servant, and some of the proposals of the George Floyd Fairness in Policing Act that is working its way through the United States Congress. We'll pick up the conversation where we left off in part one.
My old college friend Bob Carney was running for district attorney then, and he called me up and, I'm talking to him and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. He said, well, if I win, would you want to try prosecuting in the Schenectady County District Attorney's Office? And I said, well, I don't know what else. I thought maybe I would go back to grad school and get a graduate degree and teach English somewhere. But that seemed daunting because those jobs are hard to come by and they don't pay you much anyways. And so I said, okay, I'll try it if you get elected. And he did. And I said, I'll try it for a year. But by then I had tried one federal court jury trial for the law firm in Boston, and I liked it. I won it. I thought I'd done pretty well. But I still didn't know if I was going to be good at that long run, or even would like it, or would like criminal prosecution, and had no experience doing it. So I said, I'll give you a year and we'll see. So I went, started in February 1990, started trying cases immediately. Felony cases immediately. Now, normally, a new ADA goes and tries in local court and tries misdemeanor cases while they get their feet wet and start to learn about the criminal law and the criminal procedure and all of that. But I was more senior because I'd been out for a long time. I was a fairly accomplished lawyer. So, and also my boss inherited a whole huge backlog of trial-ready cases that were going to be dismissed under speedy trial rules if they weren't immediately tried. So everybody got thrown into the breach immediately, including me, and I started trying felony cases immediately. Never mind that I did not know what I was doing enough and shouldn't have been trying them.
Had you done any criminal work when you were in the private law firm?
A very little. I think I had one pro bono case as pro bono defense case for some young alleged car thief in Roxbury, but very little, and that one didn't go to trial, and and that was Massachusetts, not even the same laws as in New York. And I hadn't even taken the New York bar exam. I waived in laterally.
I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah, it was very hard. It was almost as much work doing that as taking the bar exam, but not quite as much work.
Okay.
You had to wave in through to D.C. from Massachusetts because there was reciprocity there, and there was none between Massachusetts and New York because New York's so protective of their bar. And then you had to wave in again from D.C. to New York because D.C. allows everybody. So it was complicated. But really, as soon as I started doing it, finally the light went off. This is what I'm meant to do.
So you were thrown into the deep end of the pool and you started swimming right away, and you like to swim.
I started splashing about. I'm not sure you'd call it swimming right away, but I lost my first felony trial. And we can talk about this wherever it fits for you, but I will tell you, you learn more from losing than from winning.
And you didn't win that many. I mean, you didn't lose that many. You won most of your cases.
I lost 2 felony trials over the course of my career, my first and my 7th, and then went on a pretty good streak after that. Yeah. And I learned important things from both of them. And what I learned from the loss in the first one was you trust your instincts. I didn't. I deferred to a very experienced and austere judge, me having no experience. I didn't want to anger him by objecting to part of his closing instructions to the jury, but and he was a very good judge overall, but he made a mistake like everybody does, and he instructed the jury incorrectly and in a way that was extremely hostile to my case. I knew it was hostile to my case. I knew it was going to cost me the verdict, or that it might cost me the verdict. And you're given about 5 seconds to object before he sends the jury out to deliberate. And in that 5 seconds, I hesitated. You didn't object.
You weren't sure whether he was right or wrong about the charge.
And I knew that I didn't know what I was doing because I'd gotten no training in criminal law of New York. So he sent the jury out to start deliberating, and I went immediately upstairs to our offices, and I got out the law books, and I found the pattern jury instructions, and they made it clear that my instinct was right, that the charge was dead wrong, and I went right down, and this is probably 5 minutes after the jury had started deliberating, and I got the defense attorney in, and I said, Judge, the charge is wrong. It's terrible for my case, and you need to change it. Call the jury back in and correct this. He admitted it was wrong and refused to call them back in. He said, well, if they express any confusion about the law in this area, I will correct them. And I said, well, they're not confused, Judge. Your instruction was clear. It was just wrong and hostile. And they're not going to ask you about it. They're just going to acquit. And they did. And what I learned was you get paid to use your instincts. You don't get paid to know everything. You get paid to have good instincts and to trust them and to have the guts to act on them. And I taught that to every ADA that I ever got the chance to train after that. And I never made that mistake again. I said, if you don't know, if you think it's wrong, you get on your feet and you object. You do it politely, you do it quickly, and you figure out on your way up or as you're talking what the grounds for that objection are. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. And, you're not always going to be right, trusting your instincts, but you're never going to be right if you don't. So
you said that, it didn't take you long at all once you started working in the DA's office and trying cases there for the light to go off that this is what you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. How did that realization come upon you?
I realized that what I had been looking for in a career was a career that mattered. Two things: a career that was interesting, exciting, and that mattered. And I'm not, I don't mean to be dismissive of what my firm did in Boston. It was important work for their clients. They did it honorably. And for them, it was interesting. For me, it wasn't. Um, and it didn't matter to me. And I didn't have a family to feed. I wasn't married, didn't have kids. So I was making a lot of money, but I didn't need to make that much money. Um, and it, and the work at the DA's office was both. It was exciting. It was interesting. The investigations were interesting. The criminal law is not that complicated. It's not that challenging, but criminal fact patterns are, and the motivations that people are operating under, the defendants, the victims, the witnesses, the people who come in and lie to you, and why are they lying, and what is it that you can do to get them to tell you the truth, and what do they, how do you motivate them, and jurors, of course. What do they need to hear in order to carry this terrible burden that they have and make this incredibly difficult emotional and intellectual decision? Um, all those things were fascinating to me, and it mattered. It mattered to the community. It mattered to the defendants. It mattered to the victims and their families. So what I learned, and I worked harder as a prosecutor even than I did in the law firm.
Because it mattered more to you.
It mattered more to me, and again, because I was actually going into court, and
Yes.
there was this risk of humiliation. But yeah, because it mattered more to me. And what I realized was the work at the law firm for me was very stressful, and the source of the stress wasn't that I was working so hard. It was that I was working so hard on something that didn't matter to me. And it felt to me like a waste of that effort and energy and whatever talent I had. Any smart, competent lawyer could do it. It didn't need to be me. And when I was working when I was prosecuting criminal cases, I was working harder, and you had what should have been very stressful, having to go into court and be on the spot all the time. It wasn't as stressful because it didn't feel like a waste. It felt like the right thing to do. It mattered to me. So,
what was it, Phil, about the types of cases you were trying that especially mattered to you?
I think I grew up with a very strong sense of personal responsibility and accountability. I, and that's my family. That's where I got that, and so that mattered to me. And from the standpoint of the victims, or in the case of the homicides, the victim's family. As a prosecutor, you're their one chance to get justice. You can't fix what happened to them, but you can help them get on with their lives, because you can help them not be stuck in the terrible injustice of what had happened to them. People talk about closure, and that is to some extent a myth, certainly overblown. People never get over losing a loved one to a violent crime, but they can learn, they can have their faith in the world restored if they feel like someone listened to them and someone went to bat for them. And not just the prosecutor, but the police and the jurors eventually too. So that mattered to me.
Yeah.
And every time it's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing putting someone in prison or being instrumental in them going to prison for a serious crime. But at that point, the crime has been committed. You can't fix that. And the best that you can do is hold people accountable and protect the community from the next thing that person's going to do or would do if you let them walk away. So I know there are people alive today because of the work that I did. Not just me, that every ADA did, and that police officers do. There's, police officers maybe more directly, but you're saving lives.
Right. Especially when you're trying homicide cases.
Yeah,
and you've got the right person sitting in the defendant's chair.
People don't generally, homicides generally aren't a person's starter crime.
Right.
They don't, there's no fast rules or hard and fast rules, but they generally graduate to them from other things. And you realize that had they been stopped earlier, someone else would be alive today. And if they get away with it, they're emboldened to do more.
In the cases where the prosecutor is confident that he or she has the right person accused of the crime, then you're really acting in protection and defense of the family, the victims, the family, the community, public safety. And then there are other cases where you may not be as confident that you've got the right person. And I know that just in preparing for this interview, you've taught me a few things about the role of the prosecutor that is much broader than just looking after the interests of the victims. You also have to make sure that you're not putting the wrong person in jail. And you also have a responsibility while somebody is in custody for their safety. I want to read, and that's something I really hadn't given much thought to until you and I spoke. But it makes a lot of sense. And of course, we were talking about that in the wake of the Derek Chauvin trial for the murder of George Floyd. You authored a paper, I guess, called The Right Thing, which was used in training prosecutors. I think you did that in 2009 or 2011 when you first
2011, yeah.
And I know it's been revised since then, but you still, in the revision, have been given credit for being the principal author of the document, and for every page of the document, I think the subsequent publisher wrote has your stamp on it. I'm going to read, and bear with me because this will take a minute. I'm going to read a section of this because I just found this so powerful. And I assume it's you wrote this or you had a hand in writing this. You can tell me if I'm wrong or don't tell me if I'm wrong. It doesn't matter. What matters is what it says. This is a document now that I know is used to train prosecutors in New York State, correct?
Yes, it's given out by every district attorney in the state to every one of their assistants. It's also, people have borrowed from it for ethics manuals in other states as well. Sometimes they call us and ask, and sometimes they don't. But yeah.
This is, I just found the writing here to be so powerful and so informative for somebody like me who hasn't spent a career in criminal justice. It's called The Right Thing, and it starts by saying that prosecutors have the ethical duty to do the right thing, and then it asks a question: what does this mean? And here's what it says, and now I'm going to quote. A criminal charge may be life-changing to an accused or a victim. It must never be taken for granted. Handle it like a loaded gun. Never forget its power to protect. Never forget its power to profoundly harm. It means we keep an open mind. Not every person who is suspected should be arrested. Not every suspect who is arrested should be prosecuted. Not every case tried, and not every trial won. We have the freedom, and with it the ethical duty, not to bring a case to trial until we have diligently sought the truth and are convinced of the defendant's guilt. Even then, none of us, not the police, the witness, the prosecutor, the judge, nor the juror, is omniscient or infallible. Like all lawyers, we have an ethical duty to zealously advocate for our client. But unlike other lawyers, the client we represent is the public, whose interests are not necessarily served by winning every case. A guilty verdict serves our client's interest only if the defendant is in fact guilty and has received due process. It means we seek the truth and tell the truth regardless of the consequences. We serve our client's interest when we respect the rights of the accused, when we leave no stone unturned in our search for the truth, and when the jury's verdict reflects the available evidence. When we win, we can sleep at night because the outcome, with its awesome consequences, is the product of our best effort and the fairest system humankind has devised. When we lose, we can sleep at night for the same reason. It means we succeed when the innocent are exonerated, as well as when the guilty are convicted. That is really just tremendously powerful language, and it reflects a sense of the ethical and public service responsibility of the prosecutor, not just to win cases. And we all know prosecutors who all they care about is winning their cases. I've dealt with some of them in the few criminal cases I've handled over time. But also to make sure that justice is being served and that the innocent are not being convicted of crimes they didn't commit. On another page of this, you say, or whoever wrote this says, a prosecutor's worst nightmare is not losing a major case or watching a dangerous criminal go free. It's convicting an innocent person. That's not the way we usually think about prosecutors. I think that, and I don't know if it's because of Hollywood stereotypes or if it's because of some of the cases that some of us are familiar with where there might have been prosecutorial overreaching. But I think some of us, at least, maybe not everybody, has an image that there are prosecutors who only care about winning the case and putting the accused in jail. And what you're saying, or this document is saying, is, yeah, that's part of the responsibility, but the higher responsibility is making sure that only the guilty are being incarcerated and that the innocent are being exonerated. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And my ego won't let the moment pass without saying, yes, that's my stuff.
I could tell. I know, because I know the quality of your writing. So yeah. I thought that was your writing.
And you're absolutely right. That is the heart of that booklet. And that is the most important. That's the core of the message there. And I think you're right that there are stereotypes out there, maybe that Hollywood sometimes fosters. But as we know, there's always some kernel of truth behind a stereotype. They didn't exist by accident. So I don't kid myself that all prosecutors act that way. One hopes they will. And I think most do. Most of the ones that I've known do. But then I will say not even all of the ones that I've met do. I've seen what I thought were overreaching or certainly defective performances and sometimes unethical behavior. And that is incredibly damaging when it occurs. obviously to the individual defendant, to the defendant's family, to the community that at large, and to prosecutors everywhere, because like any other profession, the bad apples will give a black eye to the profession, and one of the things I try to tell both police officers and prosecutors when I train them is remember that your jurors, that the jurors in the cases that you investigate as a police officer or try as a prosecutor, they're coming from the community. And if they have a poor opinion of the ethical behavior of prosecutors or police officers, that's going to shape their view of the evidence you're presenting, and and poison them. And it won't matter how well you try your case or how strong your evidence, if they can't trust you, you're likely to lose. So it's in the self-interest of prosecutors as well as, I mean, people don't become prosecutors to get rich. You do it because you have a sense of right and wrong, and you want to be on the side of right, and that's the reward of the job. And you're foolish if you squander that to win a case. There's no case that's worth that. It all makes perfect sense and is perfectly logical, but like everything, people fall short sometimes, and that's where training and discipline come in.
In addition to the responsibilities of prosecutors, there also are responsibilities that police officers hold.
Sure.
Both to protect the public and to protect people in their custody.
Yep.
And again, you kind of educated me about that the role of the police officer is protection of the public, but the public includes not only the victims and potential victims of the crimes, but also the defendants, the people who are being arrested. There's quite a movement now in our country at police reform. I was looking just recently at the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act of 2020, which I think has passed the House, and I know it's in the Senate right now, to create federal legislation to reform policing in certain ways. I'm sure that if anything is passed, it'll be a compromise bill that recognizes, hopefully, both the importance of protecting police officers and doing their jobs and protecting the public, but also protecting the accused from bad cops. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, but I think people might be interested in hearing from you about your thoughts about the role of the police officer in protecting public safety, protecting people in their custody from harm, as well as some of the reform movements that are happening right now. That I know you're retired. I know you're not as probably tuned into all of this as you might have been a few years ago, but still, I'm sure you have a lot to say about it.
Yeah, sure. And I did read over the 2-page summary of the bill that the fact sheet that's been put out by the CBC and that you sent to me. And I think you're right that some version of this legislation will probably be passed and signed into law, and I think it should be. I don't agree with everything in the that is featured in the summary. I think some of the suggestions are very good. Increasing the use or maybe mandating body-worn cameras for the officers, dashboard cameras for their squad cars. That's done in our jurisdiction now. I will tell you, it is a great advantage, and should be thought of by a police officer as a great advantage because it eliminates a lot of the he said, she said of police citizen encounters. Um, Not all of it, but a lot of it. Uh, so the best officers welcome that. Some don't because they're used to uh, cutting corners and being sloppy or being rude or mistreating people, and it's hard to drop those habits. And I'm always amazed. I'm always amazed when you see these uh, vest-worn camera videos of officers showing them acting like jerks or mistreating people or violating their civil rights. I think that you're being recorded. Is your training so bad that you don't know that what you're doing is wrong?
Or do
Because
they just think they can get away with it even if it is recorded?
I,
And I
I
say
don't
they, I mean,
know.
I'm sure it varies a lot from one person to another. But
I think maybe some of what happens is when you get used to wearing this all the time, like any other thing, you kind of forget it's there and they fall back on old habits. But yeah, I think those are very good suggestions. I like the idea of having law enforcement accreditation. That there already is some of that for local police departments. Our Schenectady Police Department is accredited nationally. I like the idea of pattern and practice investigations by federal authorities into local police departments. That's going to ruffle some feathers, obviously, as any jurisdictional um, turf uh, uh, conflicts do. But I think there's no reason that suspects should be treated differently in some small town in the south than they are in a big city in the north. They're people, and the rules are the same. The Constitution doesn't change. So I think there should be national standards. I like the idea of best practices uh, being developed for cops, and I like the idea of a registry of bad cops. You occasionally see a cop being fired, a police officer. I love. I've got a lot of friends who are police officers, and I love them. I don't always agree with them. They don't always agree with me, but I have a lot of respect for them. So I don't mean by saying cop uh, 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 any disrespect, just shorthand.
well,
Um,
I'll just jump in. I was at your retirement party a few years ago, and there it was mostly police officers there, I think, and um, they had tremendous respect for you. That certainly was clear to me.
well, we'd worked together on a lot of important things, and I think we made each other better through that work, and that you know, and uh, but I have seen cases where a police officer is fired by one jurisdiction for doing um, bad things, and then they get hired by another one, which probably points out um, that people aren't breaking down the doors to become police officers, and that is something that needs to be kept in mind when we're so-called reforming the police.
When
If
you're
you
talking
make,
about getting rid of qualified immunity, for example.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake. And I've given you the one of the best examples, and it's a terribly tragic case, and I know there are people who feel various ways about it, but the case of that young woman, the young girl who was shot to death by a police officer as she was about to stab another young woman. Now, if you take away qualified immunity, and um, you can define qualified immunity probably as well or better than I could, but what it doesn't mean that a police officer can't be sued or can't be liable for his acts as a police officer, but it means that there's quite a high bar, and um, that where a reasonable police officer um, could believe that what he was doing was appropriate, he shouldn't be held civilly liable for it. He could still be fired, uh, he may still be even criminally penalized under some circumstances, but he shouldn't be sued if he was trying to do the job right. But they have to make these split-second decisions.
Right.
And that was a great example. That officer had all of about a second, less than a second, to decide whether to shoot that girl or not. And had he not, it looks quite clear from the video that she would have stabbed that other girl. Now, if he is
There were
going
actually
in,
two other, I think there were
yeah,
two
there
other
were
teenagers
he
there
had
who
knocked,
could have been
she had
stabbed.
knocked one girl down, and she went up and held the other girl against the car and tried to stab her. If he went into that having been trained and having in the back of his mind that if he shoots this girl, he's certainly going to be sued, and we all know how expensive it is just to be sued and to defend, and he may lose his family's home, his nest egg, his savings, his kid's future. He may hesitate. He's not at that moment defending his own life, which may be a harder incentive to overcome. He has to decide whether to save that girl's life, and if he doesn't shoot, he's probably not going to be sued for that, even if that girl is stabbed. It's not right to take
Not every
off.
Yeah, not every situation is the same, and
No, that's right.
And putting police officers at risk for good faith decisions they make,
and
very difficult.
It's like teachers. We put all these tremendous demands on police officers, and rightly so, but we don't pay them a whole lot. And if you start telling them that whatever you are able to save, you could lose, and you're going to get sued as a cop. You could be the best cop going. You're going to get sued. Your job is going to make people unhappy. They're not going to get into that line of work. And who are you going to get to do it? People who don't have any other options but to do it. And that's not the people you're looking for. So,
but putting
I
aside
think you have to be
the
careful.
reform, putting aside the reform issue and qualified immunity specifically, what you've really impressed on me, and what the document you drafted really impresses on me, is the sort of 360-degree of responsibility that police officers and prosecutors have.
Absolutely.
To protect the public, and to include in the definition of the public the accused as well as the victims. And that's part of what makes a prosecutor a public servant. I think what I'd like to do is just end on sort of this broad question and have you answer it of, what is it about being a prosecutor that makes them a public servant, that means, and you in particular, Phil Mueller, the guy who is editor-in-chief of an Ivy League law review, who had a job in a very good private law firm in Boston, Massachusetts, and then spent 27 years of his career prosecuting homicides and I think some drug cases in Schenectady, New York. It's quite a career turn that not many people make. And what was it that about that either, I guess, from which you learned about the public service function of prosecutors and why that's so important to you today?
You can't do that job and not be immediately aware and overwhelmed in a way by the public service or the public impact that you have. It's not possible. Now, for good or evil, if you close your eyes to that, you're gonna you're going to make mistakes. You're going to do the wrong thing. But what I said in the booklet about doing it right, it is what allows you to sleep at night. You know, I remember every one of those homicide cases I tried, and the other ones that that I resolved without a trial, and I know the impact that those convictions had on the defendant. And sometimes you get to know the defendants through the course of a trial. Some of those trials lasted 5 or 6 weeks, and they've done a horrible thing, but they're not all horrible people. You see them smiling, they'll make a joke, sometimes they will even speak to you, as long as their lawyer is there and you're not asking them questions. And in the investigation process, you meet them, sometimes you're involved in questioning them. You see their humanity. You see sometimes where they went wrong and why. And sometimes you think, they could be somebody. They could make something of themselves. They could, uh, they could contribute, or they love their mothers and their children and their dogs like the rest of us do. They've just made a terrible error, and they need to be accountable for it. So it's not so much of an us-them setup. And many of them, I'm sure, hate me, but some of them didn't. They didn't even begrudge. They knew I was doing the job, and they knew I was being straight with them. Even you're involved in questioning a suspect. You be straight with them. You don't lie to them, and you hope that will inspire them not to lie to you, although it doesn't work that way all the time. And maybe they some of them think at the end they got a fair shake out of the system. You'd hope, and if they don't, they don't. But and the victims too, that they got a fair shake out of the system. And the jurors, I had, people hate jury duty, but I had jurors after trials, giving up 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks of their lives, having to do this awful thing, make this awful decision. I had jurors tell me this is the most meaningful thing I've ever done. That they were so proud because they saw a case well tried. I think the Chauvin trial is a good example for everybody who tuned in. I mean, it's a horrible case, a horrible situation, a terrible crime, discouraging in that respect. But what was encouraging was watching the lawyers on both sides. They were prepared, they were professional, they stuck to the issues, they treated each other with respect. That's, what people should see.
I was very impressed with the lawyering that I saw in that trial, probably especially on the prosecution side, but I think the defense attorney also did a very good job for his client.
I thought he did. I think he had a bad hand, obviously, as often defense attorneys do. But you can tell the ones who put their hearts and souls into it, and I think he did. I thought some of the pundits were just missing the boat. Some of them were accusing the defense of trying to assassinate Mr. Floyd's character by talking about his drug use and talking about him passing a bad bill and talking about him resisting the efforts to get him in the squad car. That was all relevant. That was not mudslinging. And it was handled in a fashion that was respectful, as it should have been. I was proud of both sides there.
Phil, if just to close this out, if there's any message you would like to leave for any of our listeners, some of whom may be lawyers, many of whom may not be lawyers, what would you like to say to them?
Can I go back to my the theme that seemed to come out of this for me, which is public service is one path, but the important thing is to trust your instincts. When I was back in Cornell, I don't think my instincts were fully developed, but occasionally I would trust them. If you're ever sitting in the law library, buried in a law book at midnight, and a pretty girl comes over and says, who you've never met, and says, "You look like you need a beer." You do. Trust that instinct.
Especially if her name is Mary.
Especially if her name is Mary. And an example of when I didn't trust my instincts, I let that girl slip away a couple months later, and for 27 years. And then I trusted my instincts again, and I tracked her down and and married her.
And knowing both of you, I will say those were very good instincts. You should have trusted them, and you're very lucky. Yep. So, right. All right, Phil. Well, thank you very much. This was a fascinating session, and I look forward to getting this published on Higher Callings, and also to continuing our conversation that I know we'll continue to have for as long as you and I are able to stay in touch.
This has been an episode of Higher Callings. Your host is Donald Federico. Music is provided by Fancy Mountain, and our logo was designed by Matt Pedro. Higher Callings is edited by Brian Federico. Higher Callings is a production of Federico Media, LLC.